Hey, good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everyone who's joining today. Thank you so much for taking part in this webinar on transforming our food systems. We're going to let folks filter in, so please make yourselves comfortable. If you would, put where you're from in the chat, what your name is, maybe what you're eating or drinking right now. This is a conversation about food after all. And so I hope you're able to partake as the day allows. So yeah, we'll get going in just a second. But yeah, thank you for joining us. And please let us know who you are. It says the chat's disabled. It's classic. Let me work on that. All right, there you go. It should be able to work in the chat now. Well, because time is short, I think we will jump right into this conversation. And thank you again for joining us. And I hope that you're able today to find something that connects yourself with where you are. I know that right now, the way that the world is, that my mind is often anywhere else but in the present moment. So, in honor, if you'll take a breath with me, a moment of quiet and calm, and then we'll begin. I want to start by thanking all of our partners who will bring this together. Now partners, Eat Food, the Future Economy Forum, the Buddhist Chiu Foundation, World Vision International, and the World Economic Forum. I also want to give special thanks to Carrick Redden, who brought us all together and instigated this conversation in the first place. I'm honored to be joined by Dr. Lucy Wallace, Ms. Bibi Laluz Gonzalez, Mr. Walter Link. Oh, I should say where y'all are from. Lucy Wallace, she's the Chief of Staff at Eat Europe. Bibi, you are the founder and director of Eat Better Why Eek. Mr. Walter Link, founding CEO of Now Partners, and Mr. Steve Chiu, who's the representative to the UN for the Buddhist Chiu Foundation. I know we're also hoping that Dr. Susan Chamba, who's the director of Vital Landscapes for Africa at the World Resources Institute, will be joining us. And if not, we'll carry on in her good name and honor. And so this is wonderful company to be in. And I want to give a sincere thank you to each of you for spending an hour with us. And I want to set the stage a bit about why we're having a conversation about values. When a segment of this group met earlier this month or last month, it was highlighted that we have the technology and the know-how necessary to begin implementing and transforming our food systems to make them more resilient to future shocks, to build local economies and community health, and to reduce greenhouse emissions, to name a few things. And yet, in so many ways, we seem stuck, maybe even going backwards. There's infighting amongst advocates and practitioners for change. The greenwashing is everywhere and confuses what progress actually is or what it could be. And despite huge support and momentum for change, because no one wants to hit the worst case scenarios outlined by the IPCC and other such reports, we're still here looking at yesterday's problems, knowing that they're still going to be there tomorrow. And the question is, how do we move? How do we get the action that we need to see? And it's said that change moves at the speed of trust. And right now, trust can be a hard thing to come by. Social contracts are being stretched, and there is an inclination to retreat into what's known and what's comfortable, rather than stretching into what's uncomfortable and into that change that we think and hope will get us to where we need to be. And we have to commit to that change, even though it's hard. We need a realignment of values and heart, and to learn to open ourselves to solutions and innovations that don't come necessarily from legacy think tanks or institutions, but that come from the communities and the people that surround and know this work the best. what does that collaboration look like, and how do we form and foster trust and alliances between what has worked and what we know will work? And how do we collectively step out of our comfort zones to create new ones? And so for that, I'm very excited for today's panel. And I think because Dr. Chamba isn't able to be here, I'm going to send it straight to you, Lucy, if you can, to share a bit about where we are as we look at regenerative ag, these spaces, and kind of the real complications that are happening, both because of some of the disagreements that are occurring in the space, some of the issues around greenwashing, and where you think this space can and should go. So over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Andrew. So I want to start by saying that regenerative looks different for everybody. Regenerative agriculture will look very different depending on where you are in the world, the landscape you're operating in, what you're farming, the market, the offtake contracts that you have to abide by, and the value system context that you're operating in. And regenerative agriculture, as we all know, is super trendy at the moment. It's the phrase on everybody's lips. We don't actually even call it regenerative agriculture anymore. We call it regen ag. And I know a lot of people have a problem with that. They don't like it. Regen ag, it sounds a bit flippant. But there are conferences dedicated to it, organizations dedicated to it, people who invest in it. EIT Food, the organization that I work for, has large programs of work on regen ag and how to scale it. We spend an awful lot of time talking about regenerative agriculture. I spend a lot of time talking about regenerative agriculture. However, within about the space of a year, regenerative agriculture has gone from being that silver bullet, the solution that will save us all, to being seen as a greenwashing term. And there's been a lot of discussion about the lack of definition for regenerative agriculture being responsible for greenwashing. And we've become incredibly hyper-fixated on coming up with a definition. But there's a great problem with defining regenerative agriculture, because it implies one way of doing things, which is super subscriptive. You're either in our special club or you aren't. It doesn't allow for diversity of approaches. It's isolating. You create a premium product which can never scale globally to the extent that we need it to, because it can't be accessed by everybody. And actually, it doesn't have our planet and our people at its heart. So by fixating on defining regenerative agriculture, or spending our time calling out greenwashing rather than spending our time on positive collective action, we miss the opportunity for positive impact. By focusing on greenwashing and not focusing on action, we are greatly missing the point. And I'm not saying that greenwashing isn't a problem, but is it the most important problem threatening our people and planet at the moment? No. If you take away the need for a definition, you open up the conversation to more people by bringing in values that they can live by rather than rules to obey that they've been told to obey, then we've got a much greater chance of saving the world. Regenerative values do not tell you exactly how you need to do something. They are not rules, but they are more the values you apply during your practice. They're principles-based, and they can be applied across the whole value chain. Rather than creating divides, this serves to bridge gaps. And, as Andrew mentioned, we're seeing an awful lot of division in the food system at the moment. Unfortunately, the way we're discussing regenerative agriculture is actively feeding that division. So I speak to corporates who are desperate to find a way of scaling regenerative in their value chains whilst maintaining profits. I speak to NGOs and foundations who really want to support farmers' transition, but they're unwilling to engage with the corporates because of fear of greenwashing. I speak to farmers who desperately want to transition to more regenerative practice, but lack the funds to do so. And I speak to farmers who say that this is no longer their conversation, as other people who have already decided what regenerative is. They are disengaged from it. So at the sake of repeating myself, regenerative looks different to everyone. And this is absolutely okay. So an exclusive club for regen ag with strict guidelines and rules and a stamp of approval may well result in a large change, but on a small scale. We only need to look at organic for examples of that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with organic, by the way, but it isn't accessible to everybody. There are lots of other examples of this in the food system, premium products at premium prices. And they require huge investment from farmers, from producers, and they're relatively global north applicable. By opening it all up and engaging and enabling a smaller change, but on a much larger scale, we would get a much bigger impact. And this in itself could be our silver bullet. This could move the needle and this could save people and planet. But in order to do this, I absolutely believe we need to focus on co-creating regenerative values and not defining regenerative agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you. And I really enjoy what you say around co-creating, because co-creating it implies a conversation, right? It implies that it's not just a singular kind of just here it is, this is what it is. And I think that's something that we see so much of it. There's this imposition of what value should be, as you said. And so for you, what does that co-creation look like? You know, how do you, in your mind, how do we move that kind of to the next step? And have you seen good examples of it?
So, I mean, co-creation absolutely needs to be sort of a multi-stakeholder co-creation. So at the moment, you know, a lot of the discussions about defining regenerative agriculture are, you know, corporates coming together and defining regenerative agriculture, or they are farmers or farmer groups coming together and defining regenerative agriculture. And they're kept very separate, and that's the big problem. Because what regenerative means to these different groups of people looks very different. As I said, you know, regenerative looks different to everyone. And even within farming communities, it can look very different. So I think it needs to be a multi-stakeholder discussion, and it needs to be a full food system discussion as well, because food is not produced in isolation. It's not just produced at the farm level. You have to abide by contracts. You have to sort of work within systems. It's a systems level problem or a systems level challenge. So actually, we need to involve all the people involved in that conversation. But I think if we start talking about it in terms of values, that's an easier conversation to have. It's not saying, you know, what are these rules that we need to come up with? It's saying, what values do we all agree with? And actually, once you talk about it in terms of values, it's quite hard to disagree with a lot of them. And I'm not going to define what those values are, because this is not up to me to do. You know, I'm not an expert. I'm not a farmer. You know, I'm not I play a very different role in the food system. But I think it's up to a larger group of people to do that. And we're starting to see these conversations happening. And this is, you know, the discussion today is kind of evidence of that, of, you know, something that a few of us got together and started to talk about and then move forward. But I think looking at, you know, the issue of scalability is a big issue. So if you're only involving sort of small groups of stakeholders, you're never going to be able to scale this to the scale that we need to. You're never going to be able to roll it out. You're never going to be able to, sort of increase knowledge, training, access to resources for large groups of people. But the minute you start having that conversation more openly and people stop being scared of greenwashing or, you know, talking to the wrong sort of people about the wrong sort of thing, then we enable that a lot better.
Thank you so much. Talk about this all day, but I know we have to get to others. So I believe Dr. Chambo was able to join, and if you are there, if you want to engage your camera to share a little bit about where we are in our food systems as they are. Hello, it's so good to see you. I know that as we discussed during our prep call, just kind of, setting the tone of where are we in our food systems? What do we see? And I know you're coming from particularly the African context, but if you wouldn't mind sharing just a broad overview of the way that you see it as it is.
Yes, and my apologies. I'm joining you from my field mission in Rwanda. So I was trying to find the right spot to be able to join. So apologies for joining late. But thank you so much, Andrew. I had some presentations, some slides, but maybe I may not be able to project them. So let's just have a conversation around where I see things. First of all, to say, you know, the global food system is broken. And I'm sure a lot of listeners in this conversation know that this is not news. We know that our food systems is broken in the sense that, first of all, it contributes at least a third of greenhouse gas emissions. We are seeing huge catastrophic biodiversity loss as a result of the way we grow food. Environmental pollution that is estimated at 64% of agricultural land is at risk of pesticide pollution, degradation of land and water resources. And yet, what we know is that we are able to produce food that can feed 10 billion people. Currently, we are not even at 10 billion people. So we do produce enough food to feed everyone, but not everybody. We still have at least millions, 820 million people still going hungry, at least for the FAO reports that have been coming out on the state of food and nutritional security. And on top of that, at least 2 billion people are becoming overweight or obese. And so we have a global food system that needs to be fixed in order that we can be able to grow and produce food sustainably for everyone, but also nutritious food, and in a way that is compatible with nature, biodiversity goals, that is compatible with the planetary goals, and that is able to feed people and not make people sick because of what we are eating. So with that, I think globally, I'd like to set the stage with that, but also reflect a little bit more on Africa, where I come from. I think the statistics are not looking good every year. The number of people, the millions of people that are going hungry every year is increasing. We are not making progress that is needed towards achieving our zero hunger goal. And on top of that, I think there's the equity dimension, where a lot of those people who are suffering from hunger and malnutrition, we are seeing significant statistics that are moving towards children and women, especially on issues around nutrition-related illnesses, such as anemia, such as stunted growth amongst children, and all of that. So there's an inequity in the system. And even though women, for instance, are responsible for producing half of that food, we are seeing that they are not benefiting from the food systems in the way it should be. So I know most of this, I just wanted to lay the landscape there and mention that the system, it's broken. It's not broken uniformly across everywhere, but that we have a model that is not working, and we think to rethink that model. And therefore the work that the faith and sustainability teams that are doing, the value-based systems of where are we as a human society, needs to inform the food systems transition that we are so looking and working towards. Transformation of food system cannot be done without centering equity, ensuring that everybody, women, youth, pastoralists, indigenous groups, and vulnerable groups are both, we are actually utilizing the agency and not taking away the agency from them, that we have a food system that is building on, recognizing and building on that agency of food systems that have withstood the test of time in terms of being resilient to climate change, producing nutritious food, diversified production system, but also diversified consumption patterns. And so I just wanted to say that to center equity within our food systems transformation and ensuring that we are respecting the knowledge, the knowledge and systems that those groups bring is going to be crucial. Let me also add that for positive change to happen, we need to engage everybody in this, in the food systems transformation. I didn't mention the issue around food loss and food waste, which is crucial and is one of the issues that I talk a lot about, that despite us producing that food, we have at least a third of it that is going, that is lost or wasted. And that is a huge moral issue, because what's the point of using resources, land, water, other inputs, labor, only to lose a third of that? And so again, as we are looking at our value-based systems on food systems transformation, what can we bring into the food system space that reflects on our shared values of shared prosperity, sharing what we have, and ensuring that the food that is produced, it's not wasted, but it's also equitably accessed by people who need it. So there's a lot to be done on the production system so that we are producing food in a better way, regenerative methods. I know that terminology has been captured sometimes to greenwash the status quo of our production system, or just focus on a few elements and not look at the entire food system. So I'm not using it with naivety, but I also want to say that we recognize the value of rebuilding soil health, rebuilding our productive system so that they are compatible with nature, whether we call it regenerative or whether we call it agroecological methods. What we see is practices that are supposed to help us shift the way we are growing food, shift the way we are sharing our food and reducing food loss and food waste, and shifting the way we are relating our production systems with nature and with the planet. So let me pause there. Those are the remarks that I wanted to share from this part.
And thank you so much, Susan. And I think that the piece around sharing, and that was something that we talked about in our call on Monday, on our prep call, where you really talked about, like, where did that community-based level of care and share go? How did these pieces get lost? And I think there's that one question, but then what you're really getting at is, how do we re-engage them? What does it mean to have that community-based, that community level? And as we see the impacts of climate, as we're seeing the impacts even rippling still from COVID, there's this sense of real loss and this stretching of our social contracts, and wondering, well, how do we get by ourselves? And then, as you say, how do we then look to engage these senses of community shared values, of looking out for our neighbors? And I think so, yes, there's so much that needs to happen just on the supply side, and the production side and consumption side, but also just in this like human element. How are we breaking through this epidemic of loneliness? How do we break through this epidemic of individual ambition into collective well-being? And I think that is something that, as much as we need to talk with our suppliers and producers, we also need to be in conversation with one another. And I think, as you were saying, Lucy, that comes from this co-creation of values, and that co-creation of values both within the actors that are creating the food systems, but then that co-creation of values within our communities. And that is almost, maybe not as hard, maybe it's harder, I'm not sure, but certainly challenging. And so I just want to thank you for that, Susan, for your intervention. And if I may go to you, Bibi, because of the work that you do in Guatemala, as well as some of the work that you've done over the last year, just looking at a more international context, and kind of bringing this question to you of not only what are you seeing and experiencing in that context of communities who are on the, how do I say it, struggling, to put it mildly, but also the lessons that we can learn and lessons that we really need to heed as we look at food systems transformation and this co-creation of values. So over to you, Bibi.
Thank you, Andrew. That is a complex question. And I'll try to summarize a bit in the minutes that we have, taking on also what you, Lucy, and Suzanne have also mentioned. First, I think I need to put it out there about the communities, right? And those who are having a rough time regarding food. And this may well be those who are, can be anyone, and it's everyone. We have what just a very technical term right now, and then I'll focus more in a more dialogue conversation. The triple burden of malnutrition. So food touches on, in different ways, those who are undernourished, which means stunting, those who are stunted and wasted, especially kids. We've also talked about obesity and overweight, with more adults and kids going through that, and the non-communicable diseases of the food choices that we make. And then they go into diabetes, cancer, heart problems, anemia, and so on. When it's today, we see it even more clearly of how the international sphere, or how the, let's say, political economy of food works, and how it touches on every one of us. For example, I can very easily mention the social cost of corruption and conflict in food and how that touches, as again I said, everyone. And then it is a push to the edge for those who are already struggling to get, for example, crops or, we're talking about agriculture, who got, because of climate, who did get or didn't get the crops that they usually thought that they would get. Drought or floods, and everything is changing. And that is what climate change is, because you cannot plan and everything's a bit uncertain. Then you get, these very processed foods that are all around that you don't necessarily depend on, let's say, being a farmer, because it's just there. But then that's those products or ingredients, they also are sourced from other places, which are commodities that are also involved in that. And then you see a surge of prices. And then in countries like mine, Guatemala, a very rich country in agriculture. Not well, we have many. We have the terrible monocultures, such as sugar, palm oil, that bring nothing but, mm, if not necessarily very healthy food choices, and they need to be aggregated into processed foods. But also we have lots of fruits and vegetables that are very affordable. And so if you choose to eat something and it is there, it's the access and the perception that you have of that food. And so how you value that food, and how you value, for example, yourself as a farmer, or as a consumer, where you get it from, that that is very, very crucial. Also, for example, if we speak about the value of women within food, and I say this so often, is of a personal experience that I had, that a mother was feeding her baby soda in a bottle instead of milk. And so when I approached her, she said, because I'm feeding my baby soda and not milk, because soda is more expensive than milk. So it's on that perception of what value are we putting on the economical price or value of food, or let's say drinks, in this sense. But then I also understood that the mother didn't value herself as a good enough woman, and much less so her free breast milk for her baby, considering this is the first food of life. And I come again with a part of values is, who is running the show? Who are those behind or in power, and what are their values first, and what is their purpose? What do they want to get out of their time in power? And then we see, if we speak about transformative food systems, we see on and on the same actors. For example, we saw that everyone who had a couple of years back the term of um, sustainability posts, now they're just transformed into ESG. And so it's the same people, but different names, different facade. But perhaps, how much are they willing to change, and how much are they putting the values into their work? I believe there's a lot of hypocrisy. We need to reassess what humanity really is, and is it that we're just driving to live or survive a few, or do we really want a common good, for everyone to lead a better life? And when I mention about the terms of communities, our work that we have done, we saw how, I mean, we mentioned in this conversation at first the values, the trust that we need to make shaky, and make people a bit uncomfortable, and alliances. We saw how, let's say, a continued approach to the communities where we served food, um, in different ways, and bringing that creativity to the field, but also the partnership between the community and us, made us more not only trustworthy, but esteemed. And the people felt esteemed as well because we were there with them together. And when you can speak food, right, in very simple terms, people understand what you're trying to, the message that you're trying to bring, and then also like make it specific to their localities. And by that, trust is built, the understanding is seated there, and then it didn't take much for us, except a couple of years, for them to go on off and become entrepreneurs in food, bring their source of income through healthy foods, through different types of agriculture. Well, there's also climate smart agriculture that we can bring in this. And I think it was for us at Eat Better Waik, it was perhaps a selfish vision that I had, that it was like, oh, we need to create the best healthy store, accessible and affordable, that there is in the village. But actually, they started doing it, the people within the community. So I think, and it's thriving without us necessarily being
Phoebe,
there every
I got to
day.
cut you off.
Yeah, I just finishing that. So I think that people really need to be less selfish. There you go.
Thanks, Phoebe. Phoebe, I could listen to you all day. If you just thank you. I really appreciate everything. And I think there's so many points to touch on. And I really like how you complicated what value is and what values are in place and what values we need to be complicating and pushing up against, and that selfishness, that greed. I think there's in this conversation so much about values. It's we rarely address the ones that predominate the room, that define these structures in our activities, the permission structures that allow for this greed, for the externalities, for the pollution, for the on and on and ons. And so really interrogating those, naming them, and then figuring out how we can work to adjust them is, that's the challenge. And so, Walter, if I may, I know this is something that you've spoken to. I listened to several of your talks over the last 24 hours, actually, talking about regenerative value, talking about regenerative ag, talking about the work that you've done within the business community to try to forge this effort of sustainability. And so, building off of the remarks that Bibi left us with, I wonder, from your perspective of working across the private sector and with different agencies, what you've learned, what you've seen, and what you are hoping can help continue in this transformation that we need to see.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think first of all, since we are talking about food, I want to focus on farmers, because there will be no different food system without farmers choosing to farm differently. So when we want to support people to change their way of action, I think we have to consider what's the complex motivational matrix that all of us have inside of us. And we have a tendency, when we come from different communities, to focus on one or the other aspects, right? So we know that old economics was saying people are just self-interested, right? And faith is pronouncing, the deeper human values that people should follow, and they make commandments. And in fact, all of that is a component of the complexity that we are, right? So there is, of course, a great importance of human values. And I think that almost everybody, unless they have a really very traumatic background, want to be good and do good. And they're looking for ways, and they maybe have a different interpretation of what that is. But in my experience, if you help them to see how they can actually live it, not just want it, but show that there are concrete ways that fit with their other motivations. And of course, for most people in the world, and that's especially also true for people in, in farmlands and farming communities, they care about their families. They need to feed families. That's priority number one. That's where our love is drawn most. And then it goes beyond the family to our community. And it's a long stretch from there to think about, I'm responsible for the climate. Even though, of course, we know all the important climate impacts, right? And I think, for example, when we look at the Amazon, so I do a lot of work and live a lot of my life in the global south. And we want people to not burn down the forest and do other destructive things. But we have to consider that there are 28 million people there that come from very poor backgrounds, mostly from slums of big cities, maybe now also immigrating from Venezuela, from abject poverty, and they are trying to make a living. So if we are not helping them to make a living in sustainable or regenerative ways, they will have to take care of their families, as they do right now. So we have to also think about farmers not only as some kind of idealized figure, but they are quintessentially the private sector. You asked me to talk about the private sector. They are business people. And an important component of their motivational structure, besides wanting to take care of their families, being good, members of a community, taking maybe bringing healthy food to their community and their children, is also to make enough income. Now, what enough is a whole interesting question, but we need to think about ways that farmers can use sustainable, regenerative, natural, whatever adjective you use before the word farming methods, that are also better for their income than the chemical farming that they are currently doing. And so I want to give a few concrete examples. And then, of course, you can go from this farmer's need and business opportunity also to what frames opportunity. How is opportunity created? Then you come to policy, you come to finance, you come to these big systems that we can orient towards more regeneration, sustainability, etc. Right? So good policy matters. Whether financing is available matters. All of these things are very important because, again, it's a whole system. And we tend to look at things, separately, but it is a whole system. And I myself became a farmer over 30 years ago. And I took over a farm that was actually very polluted and was typical for the region. And I was against much resistance, looking for a model that was not only regenerative, but that was also financially more profitable, so that many others would want to follow. And so it's a long story that we don't have time to go into, but it's exactly what happened. And now it's over 30 years later, and it's still a model, and many have followed that model. And I think this is what we need to do. We need to spread and scale, and we need to accelerate that. And one of the best examples that I have is the work of the Andhra Pradesh community-based natural farming. It says it all in this word, right? And it is so amazing, not only because it involves over 850,000 farmers and growing fast into the millions. And this, by the way, happened over only 7 years. It started with a pilot with 40,000 farmers, and now it's 20 times larger. So we can scale fast if we know how to scale. And they are better in all regards in comparison to chemical farming. All things, soil health, of course, climate impact, water, everything. So I just want to pick out one farmer whose family was farming bananas. And shifting to this methodology, they have 50 to 100% more bananas. They have 17 other crops that deliver either something to eat or to sell every week. While the banana grows for 6 months, they grow all these other crops. They therefore, of course, have vastly increased their income. They also have reduced their water intake from 6 hours a day before to 1 hour every 2 days. You know, and I could go on and on saying, you know, all the qualities, right? And this is helped also by a huge community effort. It's not only farming technologies, it's human technology. It is the capacity to bring together communities, and they help each other. And for example, they trained already 10,000 farmer coaches that are helping these 850,000 people to farm better. And now we are training, because we're working very close together in scaling this into other countries and continents, 50,000 more farmer coaches, right? So this is part of the intelligence of scaling. It's not going to happen by itself. You have to be systematic and strategic about it. And part of the strategy is that in order to qualify as a farmer coach, you have to outperform in productivity the other farmers. And if you lose that because you spend too much time coaching, you have to stop coaching. Because you can only be a teacher if you can be better than the others. Otherwise, what are you teaching? You know, I mean, an amazing comment on our education system, by the way. You tell me when I'm running out of time. There's another example that
we got like 1 more minute, then you're going to be great.
That we used a lot at COP27, and we actually used COP to grow this project from 2,000 farmers to 40,000 farmers in Egypt, right? And again, it was, how do we help these farmers to make more money? This is with SECAM, this amazing organization. It was because we're combining the shift to regenerative agriculture, or a regenerative form of agriculture, a form of agriculture that regenerates, with carbon credits. Because it's the combination of the carbon credits and the agricultural product that gives these farmers, in this particular case, more income. Now, Europeans are very critical or increasingly critical of carbon credits, because they think it helps with greenwashing for industry. And it's true, this may be used by some companies in this way, and I think it should be addressed through policy, through market mechanism. But to take the money out of the pocket of Egyptian farmers because you want to fix your problem in Europe is completely unfair, because these farmers are actually providing an amazing ecosystem service that at the moment is not paid, because they're not getting subsidies and they don't get a premium in the market. And actually the food should not be more expensive. The idea that organic should be more expensive is something we have to overcome, because we have to have access to healthy food, which, by the way, is the case with VJ's farming and with SECAM's farming, right? So these are things. And if we had more time, I would tell you about some companies that are integrating that in the supply chain, but maybe later in this call.
I would love that. Thank you. And I love how, I mean, there's so much to dig in there, and I'm looking at time, so I'm going to hold my tongue. There's so much. And I hold but it is this sense, and I think just the realities of what it takes. And I think that policy piece, and I think that the full cycle of what needs to occur, and all these different, the injection of values, the community base, the economic base, and all these different pieces. And I think, Steve, if I can come to you now, really looking at some of the work that you've done, you know, with different aspects of civil society within the faith-based world, with different faith-based organizations, but really looking at this, how do we meet faith-based values using the knowledge and wisdom from our traditions to help move along this sort of change that we need to see?
Thanks so much, Andrew, and thank you all for such a lovely conversation. I think it's so interesting jumping in because we see, like, from what Walter and Bibi have been lifting up, that there are solutions at play, right? But how Dr. Susan and Dr. Lucy have been framing this conversation around, there is this level of urgency and challenge that we have within our food system that requires a reformatting, reconfiguring of what we think are and perceive progress and success to be, right? If we just march forward with the notion of transforming and shifting to this new buzzword or this new approach without necessarily looking at the values that underpin these processes, I think we run the risk of just perpetuating the same problems and facing the exact same challenges, but with a new fresh coat of paint on it, right? And I think a lot about regeneration in this question of, if we're regenerating, what were we previously discarding that we want to include in this process, right? And we've talked about food waste already, but I think there's also conversation to be had about people, right? And how people are discarded in this very same process. And I think as faith-based organizations, the integral reason why we not only are involved in this conversation and have a stake in this transformation, but need to do so in a multi-sectoral way and break down these silos across our sectors, is because we come in with this intersectional conversation around values. Oh my God, Walter, balloons! I love it.
I don't know how that happened.
It's so good. It's perfect. But so I'll just quickly lift up a couple values and then maybe jump into like some other thoughts. So I want to lift up, as we look towards this move and shifting and transforming our food systems, we have to do it with a lens of mindfulness, right? To consider like who is being impacted by these changes. Do they consent to this change, and how are they being incorporated in this process? We've already spoken about accessibility, right? So the end product of food being accessible, food as a foundational and basic human right, I think is something that needs to be better enshrined within our policies and how we care for each other and how we design these environments, right? Because at the end of the day, our production and consumption are both designed by human beings, right? So what values do those human beings have, and how can we convince them through these different arms, faith being one of the many arms of culture change, to shift to have more accessibility of food and affordability of food for those who may not necessarily have the same privileges as many of us do. I think there's also conversation around community, and we spoke about how we want to shift away from the dangers and poisons of individual ambition, right? And really move towards this collective well-being. And I think faith-based organizations model that very well, right? When we think about like how do we put values into action, it's really about like, do we have the imagination to see how this can take place, right? And we know that there's practices and models that can really be scaled up. And so showcasing them as faith-based organizations that say we are really committing to taking these values and putting them into actions, I think is one like really powerful contribution that we bring into this space. And finally, there's conversations and values around interdependence too, right? And recognizing that until we deeply hold to our own hearts the fact that we are deeply intertwined, interdependent, interconnected with the natural world, the animals living in it, other human beings that are part of this system and this chain, I don't think we'll get to the transformation we need to see within our food systems, right? Because there will always be this us and them, and it's like we profit at the expense of others, and that narrative needs to be broken down. And the way forward to do so is to showcase actions that are truly motivated by the principle of interdependence. And I think civil society has a lot to learn from different faith-based organizations that really model their practices this way. In my final minute, I want to lift up this question around, are we willing to change, right? And knowing and recognizing that profit is a very seductive drive, right? And to ask people to set aside, maximize profits in the name of letting go of greed for the prosperity of people they have no connection with can be a very abstract notion, right? And I think moving with and communicating and advocating with faith-based organizations gives us the collective power to not only lift up those very voices of the people who we are working to empower, give agency, and really highlight, but really put a human face and lens to those who are being disproportionately impacted by our poor and terrible choices based on the values we currently hold.
Wow. Thanks, Steve. That was great. So here's the thing. we're way over time, and I'm not really upset about that at all. It just means that we're going to have to do the end of this a little bit differently. And I apologize because there was supposed to be a big chunk for Q&A, but then you all were so engaging and interesting. How'd you say no? So here's where we're going to go. The conceit of this was to look towards COP28, because I know food is going to be a major topic there. I know many of us on this call are going to be in attendance, working at different food pavilions. God bless you for all that hard work, because I know it's very hard. And good luck. But I want to, in the last 9 minutes that we have now, maybe call it 8, look to each of you, and I'll start with you, Dr. Susan, if I may, of what you want both to get out of COP28, and then I feel like so many of these moments, they are the moment themselves. They are a vortex that just suck in all the energy. You do the event, you have the conversation, and then you look to the next event. And so I'm curious where you would like to see things go between after COP28 and then looking forward. And so if you could keep your comments to a minute, maybe 2, I'll put up my little yellow hand to stop you if you're going over. But looking to COP28 beyond, Dr. Susan, over to you.
I believe Dr. Susan has stepped off the call.
Dr. Susan sure did step off the call. So Dr. Lucy, if I may, over to you. Same question.
I don't think anyone calls me Dr. Lucy, but there you go. Thank you very much for calling me Dr. Lucy. It makes me feel very important. COP28 is a funny one because everybody focuses on the panels, and I know we've got a panel organised. So I'm at EIT Food. I lead the Secretariat for the Food Systems Pavilion. So obviously there are an awful lot of panels in the Food Systems Pavilion. People put a lot of effort into panels, but actually I don't think that is the interesting thing about COP. And I don't think is the thing that we need to be doing when we're at COP. Actually, we need to use the opportunity at COP to have these discussions and these deep dialogues with people where we talk about actually where we are going. We talk about sort of real actions. And I think that's the opportunity that COP allows us. You know, context is set by some of the panels that are there. You know, that means that people turn up. But actually, if we can use the space and the time to have some really sort of proper conversations about where we want to go with regenerative, what those values might be, and we're not going to get to any solutions, and we're not going to get to those sort of final answers there. But I think it provides us with that opportunity and time. And then after that, I think we need to make sure that we continue those conversations. It is not all about COP. Yeah, COP's very important. We spend a lot of time on it, but it is not about COP. It's about us actually using the opportunities to have the discussions, then take them forward and continue this discussion on regenerative values and, you know, the role that faith-based organizations can play within that, can play within the scalability of these really important solutions for us all. Was that all right? Was I a minute?
Nailed it. It was so good. Walter, if I may, over to you.
Well, this gives me particular pleasure because then I can not only talk theoretically about things, but to say that our collaboration with Dr. Lucy has been an absolute example of how, also with Marijn Dals, who's one of our managing partners of the Future Economy Forum, how we met and we found each other in a deep sense of trust and inspiration. And now we do a lot of stuff together that will make our contributions much better. So it is for us also very much about relationships, because we believe that that's the basis for resilient action. And so we are really, to summarize it, bring 2 things to COP: concrete solutions of how regenerative forms of agriculture are outperforming chemical agriculture. That we therefore, when we scale this, can create a new mainstream of agriculture. Of course, in the transition, we will have a lot of different current mainstream agriculture methods, but we can have a clear vision that regenerative forms of agriculture will become the new mainstream of agriculture, food systems, and the overall economy. Number 2, how do we get there? As you said, COP is a moment of inspiration, a moment of coming together, 70,000 people that have the potential to get to know each other, work together. but it is only as good as what happens afterwards. And so we are working very much in our pavilion on the advancing of concrete initiatives that then last. And we also have already a vision on 2030 where we work with the wonderful person that will head that, Marina Silva, the Minister of Environment and Climate of Brazil, who in the first less than a year was able to reduce deforestation in the Amazon by 50%. So that's a solution. Now we need to develop the bioeconomy there so that this can be sustained. What are the concrete actions? What are the people we need? And so we bring together very diverse stakeholders to look at very concrete issues. How do we grow this solution? How do we scale that solution? How does it need to be adapted to the different circumstances and so forth? So very much about relationship and about concrete action.
Thank you so much, Walter. Bibi, over to you.
Thanks. Well, starting out, Dr. Lucy, I believe I need to get a PhD.
I can call you Dr. Bibi if you want. Dr. Bibi, please, over to you.
Up and coming. So what I love, well, I've never participated in person to COP, but I have contributed from our spaces in Guatemala through different spheres. So at least speaking about the communities that I was mentioning at the beginning, for those who we aren't able to join, and what happens after COP is very, very important. You have mentioned like the how to do things, and I just hope that whatever agreement, funds, partnerships is established in this big moment that it's concentrated with so many people and throughout many weeks, that it also comes with let's say with a backpack of different tools that can be applied, including, as we mentioned before, the finance to the communities who need it. And we hear so much, oh, we have allocated this fund here and there, but then how do we access it? If we were talking about access of food, then this is the same with the access of finance or funding to do so. So to get a better light on that issue, and to be more diverse in where those funds are being put or sent through, and to be put into those who you trust, of course, and that have values and very good spirit to do good, right? So yeah.
Thank you, Bibi. Steve, over to you.
I think I'll lift up two particularities building on top of everything that everyone's kind of spoken to already. I think the Sharm el-Sheikh Joint Work Plan on Agriculture and Food Security is still in the process of like being codified and formulated, right? And part of that work that's going to be taking place at COP is a continuation of something that happened in Bonn during the SBs, where they're trying to understand how these different workshops that they're going to be hosting around agriculture will be formulated. What are some of the topics that they'll be touching on and talking about? And one thing that we're seeing within our space is there's a intense push from the private sector to want to utilize technology as the key solution to address our food systems challenges, right? They're looking at sustainable intensification, artificial intelligence as ways to solve our global hunger crisis, right? And our food insecurity issues, and food waste seems to be relatively missing from the picture, right? And so there's, I think, within our advocacy and what we're looking to do within this space is not only make sure that food as an issue is highlighted in its intersectionalities, but also ensure that the right approaches and solutions are on the table to be discussed moving forward with all of our ministers of agriculture, and then have the opportunity to also lift up some of these stories of those who are working at the ground that are facing unique challenges that really require and need the attention of the global community beyond the spectacle.
Cool. Thank you. And thank you to everyone and to our wonderful panelists. I know we are right at the hour. And so thank you to everybody who took the time to be with us today and for all of your wonderful wisdom. I know that the challenges are robust, and that there are great hills to climb. And I think that this COP, as much as it represents opportunity, I know it's so complicated with where it's held and the presidency and just this entire conversation around climate change and fossil fuels. And so as we wade into these deep issues, these deep politics of one, needing to decarbonize, two, looking at community-based development, three, this reimmersion of a different kind of value and taking our entire systems approach, these are so huge and so complex and so daunting. And I think acknowledging just that really, really honest feeling of what do we do is necessary, and the anxiety and the fear and a lot of the sadness and grief that comes along with that. But also knowing, and I just am so grateful to each of you for the way that you approach this work and your willingness to allow it to be complex and for it to be hard and to find hope and to keep pushing. And I think that is something that we need to hold on to. And that's why we need to hold on to each other in these moments, in these spaces, and create more of these spaces and more of these conversations and dialogues, because that is how we're not only going to move it forward, but we're going to hold each other up as we do this work. And that is what we need the most right now. So with that, I want to say thank you again to our speakers. I want to say thank you to everyone who tuned in and to our partners. It has been such a delight. And so thank you from all of us at the Center for Earth Ethics. I hope you have a wonderful morning or afternoon or evening. So long. We'll talk to you later, I hope. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys. Take care.